Trust me, you won't forget this one. She thought the maid had no one. No money, no family, no way to fight back. So she poured that pitcher of ice water over her head, right there on the marble steps, laughing while the staff watched in silence. But she didn't know who was walking through that gate behind her. She didn't know the maid's real story. And in less than 60. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and which country you belong to. Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far this community reaches. Today's story is one of the most emotional and unexpected ones we've ever told. About power, pride, and the moment a rich man realized who was really worth protecting in his life. I promise you by the end of this you'll be thinking about it for days. Let's get into it. Nobody in that mansion knew her real name, not even the man she worked for. The Hamilton estate sat on 11 acres outside of Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of property that made tourists slow their cars down just to stare through the iron gates. Marble fountains. Manicured hedges shaped like swans. A house so large the staff joked they needed walkie-talkies just to find each other during dinner service. Maya Coleman had worked there for almost 2 years. She was 29 years old, quiet, careful, and always the first one awake in the house. Before the sun came up, she'd already have the kitchen humming, the newspapers pressed and folded on the hall table, the coffee brewing exactly the way Mr. Hamilton liked it. Strong, no sugar, a splash of cream. Daniel Hamilton was 33, a self-made billionaire who'd built his tech company from a garage in Austin into one of the most talked-about firms in the country. He wasn't like the other wealthy men Maya had worked for in the past. He said please, and thank you. He remembered her name. Once when she was sick with the flu, he'd sent his own doctor to check on her, no questions asked. But Daniel wasn't around much. Business kept him traveling constantly. Singapore, London, New York. And in his absence the house belonged to someone else. His fiancée, Victoria Sterling. Victoria was 31, elegant in the way expensive things are elegant. Polished, cold, and clearly aware of her own value. She had grown up with money, married into more of it twice before, and treated the Hamilton estate like a stage she'd been rightfully cast to rule. The staff feared her. Not because she yelled, she rarely raised her voice, but because of the way she looked at people who worked with their hands, like they were furniture that occasionally needed adjusting. Maya had learned to stay quiet around her. Keep her head down. Do the work. Don't give her a reason. But some people don't need a reason. It started small. Victoria would leave a mess just to see if Maya cleaned it fast enough. She'd criticize the folding of towels, the temperature of tea, the way flowers were arranged in the foyer. Maya took it all without complaint because she needed this job more than Victoria could ever understand. What nobody in that house knew, not Victoria, not even Daniel, was why Maya needed it so badly. 3 years ago Maya had been someone else entirely. She'd had a small apartment in Atlanta, a nursing degree half-finished, and a 6-year-old daughter named Josie who loved butterflies and bedtime stories. Then a car accident took her husband's life and left Maya with medical bills that swallowed everything she had. He dropped out of school. She sold what she could. She moved in with her aunt in South Carolina and took the only job she could find fast enough: housekeeping. She never told anyone at the estate about Josie, who now lived with Maya's aunt while Maya worked. She never told them about the nursing degree sitting unfinished in a drawer, or the dream she still carried quietly, of one day becoming the kind of nurse who held people's hands when they were scared. To Victoria, Maya was simply the help. A woman with no story worth knowing. That morning everything changed. It was a Tuesday and the estate was preparing for a charity gala Victoria was hosting that weekend. 300 guests, a live orchestra, enough flowers to fill a greenhouse. Victoria had been unbearable all week, snapping at every vendor, every florist, every staff member who crossed her path. Maya was polishing the silver tea service on the back veranda when Victoria came storming out, phone in hand, face tight with anger. "This is unacceptable," Victoria said, though not to Maya, to whoever was on the other end of the call. She hung up hard enough that the phone nearly slipped from her hand. Then her eyes landed on Maya. "You," Victoria said. "Did you move my invitation list from the study?" Maya looked up, startled. "No, ma'am. I haven't touched your study today. Don't lie to me." Victoria's voice was sharp now, carrying across the veranda. A few of the outdoor staff glanced over, then quickly looked away, the way people do when they sense something bad is about to happen and want no part of it. "I'm not lying," Maya said carefully. "I was in the kitchen all morning." Victoria stepped closer, and for the first time, Maya saw something in her eyes that made her stomach drop. Not just anger, but a kind of cruelty looking for a place to land. "You people always say that," Victoria muttered. "Always so innocent." Maya said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. Mini cliffhanger. What Victoria did next would be witnessed by half the household staff, and it would reach Daniel Hamilton before the day was over. The silver pitcher was still cold from the ice room when Victoria picked it up. Maya set the tea tray down slowly, hoping the moment would pass, hoping Victoria would storm off toward the house the way she usually did after one of her outbursts. But Victoria didn't move. She stood there a moment longer, staring at Maya with an expression that made the housekeeper's chest tighten. "Kneel down and check the drain in the fountain," Victoria said suddenly. "It's been sputtering all morning and I want it fixed before the gala." Maya blinked. "Ma'am, that's really a job for maintenance. I don't." "I said kneel down and check it." The words hung in the warm South Carolina air. A gardener nearby paused his trimming, pretending not to hear. Maya hesitated only a second before lowering herself onto the stone steps beside the fountain, reaching toward the small drain grate, her knees pressing into the cold marble. It wasn't really about the fountain. Maya understood that. This was about control. About watching someone lower themselves, literally, because Victoria needed to feel powerful on a day she felt like everything else was slipping out of her hands. As Maya knelt there, fingers working at the grate, Victoria's gaze drifted to the silver pitcher of ice water sitting on the tea tray, freshly filled for the gala planning meeting later that afternoon. "You missed a spot," Victoria said coldly, nodding toward Maya's apron. "Right there." Maya looked down, confused. "I don't see anything, ma'am." "I said right there." And before Maya could react, before anyone on that veranda could say a word, Victoria lifted the heavy silver pitcher and poured it directly over Maya's head. The cold hit like a slap. Maya gasped, flinching backward, water streaming down her face, soaking through her uniform, dripping onto the stone beneath her knees. For a moment the entire veranda went silent, the gardener frozen mid-clip, a maid in the doorway with a stack of linens pressed to her chest, another staff member standing at the edge of the patio with wide, disbelieving eyes. Victoria straightened up, almost smiling, the empty pitcher still in her hand. "Maybe now you'll listen when I speak to you." Maya stayed on her knees for a moment, water dripping from her chin, humiliation burning hotter than the cold water ever could. She thought of Josie. She thought of the rent due next week, the nursing books in her aunt's spare room, the promise she'd made to herself that no matter what, she would keep this job long enough to get back on her feet. She swallowed hard, wiped her face with her sleeve and stood up slowly. "I'll finish the fountain, ma'am," she said quietly, her voice trembling but steady. Victoria didn't respond. She simply turned and walked back toward the house, her heels clicking against the stone, the empty pitcher still dangling from her fingers like nothing at all had happened. What none of them noticed, not Victoria, not the frozen staff, not even Maya, still catching her breath on the veranda steps, was the black car that had just pulled quietly through the estate's front gate. A car that wasn't expected until the following week. A car that belonged to Daniel Hamilton, who had cut his London trip short by 4 days after a phone call from his assistant that morning. A call about numbers on the household budget that hadn't been adding up, expenses tied to Victoria that he needed to see for himself. Daniel stepped out of the car just in time to see his fiancée walking away from a soaked, humiliated housekeeper on his own front steps, in front of half his staff in broad daylight. He stood frozen at the top of the driveway, keys still in his hand, watching the scene unfold 30 yards away. And for the first time since he'd met Victoria Sterling 2 years ago, something inside him went completely cold. Mini cliffhanger. Daniel had seen everything. And what he decided to do next would change 3 lives forever. Victoria didn't know Daniel was standing there. She was about to find out the hard way. Daniel stood at the edge of the driveway for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 seconds. His mind raced backward through the last 2 years. The small comments Victoria made about the staff when she thought he wasn't listening, the way she'd once suggested he upgrade the household help, like they were outdated furniture, the excuses he'd made for her because he told himself people show their best selves in public and their true selves rarely mattered. He'd been wrong. This was her true self. And it had just been on full display. He walked forward, his footsteps measured, his face unreadable in a way that made even the gardener nearby straighten up nervously. Maya was still standing near the fountain, dabbing at her soaked collar with a cloth, her back to the driveway, unaware that her employer had witnessed the entire thing. "Maya," Daniel said gently. She turned, startled, water still dripping from a loose strand of hair. Her eyes went wide with a flash of panic. Not fear of him, but the instinctive fear of being seen in a moment of such raw humiliation. "Mr. Hamilton, I didn't know you were back today. Are you okay?" he asked, his voice quiet but urgent, cutting through her attempt to smooth things over. Maya hesitated. In 2 years, no one at that estate had ever asked her that question in a tone that actually wanted the truth. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the way people who are used to being invisible always say. "You're not fine," Daniel said. "I saw what happened." Those 5 words landed like thunder. Maya's breath caught. Behind them, through the tall windows of the study, Victoria was already back inside, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that her fiancé had returned 4 days early and had watched every second of what she'd done. Daniel turned toward the house, jaw tight, and walked inside. What happened over the next 20 minutes would become the thing the household staff whispered about for months afterward, not because it was loud, but because of how calm and absolute it was. He found Victoria in the study, already back on a call about seating arrangements for the gala. "Hang up the phone," he said. Something in his voice made her do it immediately. "Daniel, you're back early. I watched you pour ice water on Maya's head on my front steps," he said, his tone even, controlled, devastating in its steadiness. "In front of my staff. On my property." Victoria's face shifted through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, then a flicker of calculation, then finally an attempt at composure. "Daniel, she was being disrespectful. Don't," he said, holding up a hand. "Don't finish that sentence." The room went silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel, a wedding gift from Victoria's mother that suddenly felt absurd given the moment. "You've spent 2 years treating the people who work in this house like they're beneath you," Daniel continued. "I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was nerves about the wedding. I made excuses because I wanted to believe the woman I was going to marry wasn't actually like this. Daniel. But I just watched you humiliate a grieving widow raising a 6-year-old on her own, kneeling on marble steps, because you wanted to feel powerful for 30 seconds. Victoria froze. "What did you just say?" Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't even know her story, do you? You've had her in this house for 2 years and you never once asked." He was right, and the silence that followed confirmed it. Victoria had no idea about Josie, about the accident, about the nursing degree sitting unfinished, about any piece of the woman she just humiliated in front of an entire household. To Victoria, Maya had simply been a uniform, a set of hands, a person who existed to make her life more comfortable. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something final settling behind his eyes. "The wedding is off," he said quietly. "I want you out of this house by the end of the week." Mini cliffhanger. But what Daniel did next for Maya would shock everyone. including Maya herself. Victoria thought she still had one card left to play. He was wrong. Victoria's composure cracked completely. "You're ending our engagement over a housekeeper?" "I'm ending our engagement," Daniel said, "because you showed me exactly who you are and I finally decided to believe it." He walked out of the study without another word, leaving Victoria standing there stunned, her carefully built world beginning to crumble in real time. Outside, Maya had changed into a spare uniform and was trying, unsuccessfully, to act like the last hour hadn't happened. She was refolding linens in the laundry room when Daniel found her, his expression softer now, though still carrying the weight of what had just occurred inside. "Can we talk?" he asked. Maya's hands stilled over the linens. "Mr. Hamilton, you really don't need to worry about me. Maya." He said her name the way you'd say it to someone you actually saw. "Please. Sit down." She sat nervously across from him at the small table in the staff kitchen, the same table where she usually ate her lunch alone 15 minutes at a time between tasks. "Tell me about your daughter," Daniel said. Maya's eyes shot up. "How do you? My assistant mentioned it once months ago when your aunt called the house about a school event." He paused. "I should have asked you about her a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't." Something in Maya's chest cracked open, the wall she'd built over 3 years of surviving quietly beginning to give way. She told him haltingly at first and then more freely about the accident, about her husband, about the nursing degree she'd never finished, about Josie's laugh and how it was the only thing that had kept her going some days. Daniel listened. Really listened the way almost no one had in 3 years. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I want to pay for the rest of your nursing degree," he said finally. "Tuition, books, everything. And I want to adjust your schedule so you can attend classes." Maya shook her head immediately. "Mr. Hamilton, I can't accept that. It's too much. You held this house together while I traveled the world," he said. "You never once complained even when you had every reason to. And today, in front of my own staff on my own property, you were treated like you didn't matter." His voice caught slightly. "You matter. And I should have made sure you knew that a long time ago." Maya's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for what felt like years, not just that day. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll finish your degree," Daniel said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through. "Say you'll let people help you for once." Word of what had happened spread through the estate by nightfall, not through gossip, but through the simple, undeniable fact that Victoria's belongings were being packed into 3 separate cars by the following afternoon, and that Daniel Hamilton had personally walked into the local community college's financial office to set up a full scholarship fund in Maya Coleman's name. But the story didn't end there. Because 2 weeks later, Daniel did something nobody expected. Something that would turn a private moment of justice into a lesson the entire household and eventually the entire town would never forget. Mini cliffhanger. What Daniel Hamilton announced at the estate's next gathering left every single guest in that ballroom in complete silence. Nobody expected the gala to happen at all. Nobody expected what it would become. Daniel didn't cancel the charity gala. Instead, he transformed it. What had originally been planned as a lavish engagement celebration became something entirely different. A fundraising event for local nursing students and single parents returning to school, hosted at the very same estate, under the very same string lights Victoria had once obsessed over. 300 guests arrived that Saturday evening, many of them expecting to hear wedding announcements, only to find programs on their seats titled, "The Coleman Fund for Working Families." Whispers rippled through the crowd as guests began to understand that something had changed, though few knew the full story yet. Maya almost didn't attend. She stood outside the ballroom in a borrowed dress, hands trembling, certain she didn't belong among Charleston's wealthiest families. But Daniel found her at the entrance, offered his arm and walked her in himself. The room quieted as they entered together. Not as employer and employee, but as 2 people who had somehow in the space of 2 weeks, become something neither of them had expected. Daniel took the small stage near the orchestra and asked for everyone's attention. 2 weeks ago, he began, I watched someone in this house treat another human being with a cruelty I never want to witness again. I won't share every detail because it isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about what I learned from it. He glanced toward Maya standing near the edge of the room, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. I learned that the people who quietly hold our lives together, who wake up before us, who carry burdens we never ask about, deserve to be seen. Not just tolerated. Seen. His voice grew steadier. Tonight, this fund will provide scholarships for working parents pursuing nursing and healthcare degrees across South Carolina. It starts with one woman who reminded me what real strength looks like. The room erupted in applause and Maya, tears streaming freely now, felt Josie's small hand slip into hers. Her aunt had brought her daughter for the evening, a surprise Daniel had quietly arranged. Josie looked up at her mother, confused by the applause, by the lights, by the sudden warmth of an entire room turned toward them. Mommy, why is everyone clapping? She whispered. Maya knelt down the same way she had knelt on those cold marble steps 2 weeks earlier. But this time, it wasn't humiliation bending her knees. It was gratitude. Because sometimes, Maya said softly, good things happen when people finally decide to see you. In the months that followed, Maya finished her nursing degree. She eventually left the estate not because Daniel asked her to, but because a hospital in Charleston offered her a full-time nursing position. The dream she'd shelved 3 years earlier finally within reach. Daniel and Maya stayed close friends, their bond forged in that strange, painful, transformative day rather than anything more complicated, though the town never quite stopped speculating. Victoria Sterling, for her part, disappeared from Charleston society almost entirely, her reputation unable to survive the story that eventually made its way through the city's social circles. Not through cruelty but simply through truth. And every year on the anniversary of that first gala, the Coleman Fund hosts a new class of scholarship recipients. Nurses, teachers, single parents chasing degrees they once thought were out of reach. Maya always attends. She always tells them the same thing before they walk across that stage. Someone once poured cold water over my head to remind me of my place, she tells them. It ended up showing me exactly how far I could go instead. The lesson in all of this is simple, but it's one worth remembering. Kindness and respect cost nothing, and cruelty, even quiet, casual cruelty, always eventually finds its reckoning. The people who serve us, who work in silence, who carry burdens we never see, deserve to be treated with the same dignity we'd want for ourselves. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always matters. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.